Hey guys, Keith here. Time for a update video, this time covering versions 2020.11 through to 2020.18. Not a huge number of changes, enough that we'll no doubt be here for an hour, but not a huge number of changes, but some kind of important ones that add some interesting capabilities that you probably should be aware of. And so let's go through them. As usual, I'll start with the oldest and move through to the newest. I'll probably do most of the xLights ones first and then maybe come back to the handful of X schedule changes. So let's start off. The first one is this one. There's a couple of new vendors in here. So we've added the WLED controllers. The WLED controllers, you just have to set WLED, WLED. These are those ESP8266 E131 type controllers. So you can now actually put them in here. Now there's no support for upload. We haven't built an upload. I actually haven't bothered to create any WLED controllers. So at the moment, it's just the ability to specify it and enforce the rules. So it is xLights is aware of some of the constraints around the WLED controllers and will apply those constraints as you start to assign models to it, etc. But yeah, it's puts it there. So that's all. Brightness settings control in the visualizer dialog. Let's add a few props here so that we can start demoing some things. Let's change this to my preferred Falcons, so no expansion boards. That looks great. Let's go into our visualizer. So this was something that Scott introduced. Basically what it means is he can come in here and you can now set the brightness here using this menu item. So you can come in here and say it's 30%. So rather than having to go to the models and set the brightness, you can do that. Of course, when you drop a second model on here, it inherits the brightness of the previous one. So it comes through. This will actually be 30%. But if I went in and set the brightness to 100, of course, it would break it up onto a virtual string because that's necessary if you want to run different brightnesses on the same output from a controller. So yeah, unfortunately, there is no way here to clear the brightness. You would have to go back to the layout, find that prop. Oops, I'm in draw mode, so I'm dropping extra stars at a rate of knots here. Okay, so yeah, if you come down here, you'd have to clear that checkbox to clear the brightness. And now if I come back to the visualizer, it will go back to the way it was. So it's not perfect, but it's slightly there. Allowing upload of the config to the Pi-Hat serial port. All that really means is that if you go in here and you define an FPP with a Pi-Hat and you come, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. That's not going to work. And you come in here with this serial port and you were to drop models onto this serial port, it would now correctly upload that and configure your Pi-Hat, assuming your Pi-Hat in this case does have a serial port configured. So that's what that one means. Remember the import and submodels dialog size and position. Look, this is a long-running saga that we just seem to always struggle with. But effectively what that means is this dialog here, which just popped up on my bottom screen right now, if I close this and now I bring it back up again, it will remember where it last was and come back. There's also been some code added which will attempt to determine when this dialog appears on a non-existent monitor. Maybe you had a monitor plugged in and it appeared there, and it will try and drag it back so that it's visible on our monitor, so that you don't run into the situation where xLights appears to hang. Every time you click on something, it beeps and you can't do anything. And that's usually because a dialog's popped up somewhere and you can't see it. So some fixes there. Hopefully they will work. Extend options. So there's a couple of transition changes. These were things that Kevin was working on. We'll put our color on it. We'll make this, I don't know, a 2-second transition. And so this is a 2-second in transition, or out transition, sorry. Let's make it an in transition. So there's the bow tie. The adjustment appears to adjust where the center is on the bow tie. I think when it was first done, there was only one possibility, which was in the middle. So now you get to move that around. And the star transition is down the bottom here. So it basically fills the screen in with a star. Again, it has this appears to control the ratio between the inner and outer star. So yeah, the more you go over here, the more spiky it seems to get. Actually, I think it might control the number of points. Yes, it seems to control the number of points on the star. So over here, there's a lot of points. Over here, there's basically no points. So it's effectively a circle. So yeah, some changes to the transitions. And that was everything in 2020.11. In 2020.12, all right, so the next change relates to FPP and adding an additional column to FPP Connect. So if we come into FPP Connect, give it a second to run around my network and find devices. You can see now down here where the sequence is, it actually shows you the last modified date on the sequence. That's really useful for understanding, is the sequence the one that I just saved? Is it up to date, so that when you do the upload, you can now use the date to determine whether you need to upload that or not. So that's that one there. He also allows sorting on these columns. So you can see now there's this little up arrow here. Now, if I had multiple sequences, you can sort them by modified date. You can sort them by the media file name and so forth. So it may be easier to find your sequences or work out the ones that have changed by sorting them by the modified date, and you can just quickly upload the ones that have been recently altered. All right, let's go to the next one. So the next one relates to the custom model dialog. So when you're in there creating a custom model, some time ago we added this black box down here, which is effectively a custom model visualizer. It's not that interesting when you're in 2D mode, where you're just adding nodes like this. It really comes into its own in 3D, because this is actually a 3D preview and you can drag it around and move it all over the place. And it shows, the first node's always shown in yellow and all the other nodes are there. But you'll notice when you come up here and you click on a node, it highlights that node in the magenta color. Which can be really useful if you're working on a very large model and maybe you're zoomed in and you want to be crystal clear about which node you're editing or about to change. It's now very easy to move around here, and as you cross over the various nodes, it will highlight the ones that you're currently on, so it's easier to orientate yourself. It becomes particularly important when you're working on complicated 3D models and you're in different layers and you want to know, well, where exactly am I? Because it can get very very hard to keep track of all of that. So yeah, that's that one. Adding superstring support. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on superstring support. Superstring support is something that I covered in a separate video. It's effectively one of these string properties down here. There's now, of course you can't see it because it's all dropped down. But down here there is now this superstring property, and this lets you, superstrings, for those that aren't familiar with them, are where you take old school LEDs or even incandescent lights and you take maybe 2 or 3 or 5 strands even of different colors, and you basically effectively bind them together, typically by twisting them, and then you would control each set of LEDs as a single color string, except by joining them all together, you've got this string that you can basically change to the different colors of the different LEDs that you've included in the superstring. And so this allows you to create super strings of different colored LEDs and decide which LEDs they are. and sequence them. Now, there are some things that this does really well, but there are some real trips and tracks to using this, and so you're really going to want to watch my superstring video to start to get an understanding of how to actually use this thing effectively. I'm not going to go through it here. That's 15-20 minutes alone, and I will never do it justice in a quick update. Chroma key. Okay, so chroma key is, you'd be familiar with chroma key. It's used in television all the time. It's also known as green screen. So what you would typically have is you would have some sort of background that you want to bring through, and then you would have some sort of foreground. And so, I don't know, let's throw a video in. We can find a video, we'll browse for it. All right, let's this will do here. So now we've got a video, and you can see that while the video's running, the butterfly effect disappears. But what happens if I wanted to make, I don't know, that magenta color actually transparent and reveal the butterfly underneath? First of all, let's loop it so that it runs all the way through the effect. So the way you do that is with this chroma key. Now, the first thing you need to do is you need to turn the chroma key on, which we've done there, and you can already see the chroma key starting to let it through. But the next thing you need to do is choose your color. And so in this case, we're choosing something that is magenta, which is probably, that's the solid magenta, all red, all blue, no green. And we'll do that. And you can see that hasn't really worked. Maybe actually it's a bit more of a darker pink, almost purple. Let's go with that. It still has it. But the other thing you can do is change the sensitivity. And so by moving the sensitivity around, you can get it to the point where it works with a sufficiently broad color band that those pinks have now started to let it flow through. So you either get the color match perfect, and we go back in here and we work out that that's actually more of a purple than it is anything else. And if we use that as the color, it starts to work a little bit earlier, but yeah, not hugely early. But yeah, color chroma key effectively lets you take any color in an effect and make it transparent and reveal the layer below. Works brilliantly with green screen. If this was a video which had a green screen background and a talking head, we would be able to basically remove the green screen and allow the butterfly effect through to become the background. So that's chroma key. The final one in 2020.12, there was enhancements around the FPP upload in terms of recognizing the huge array of hardware that now runs on using the FPP firmware or software. And so there was a bunch of changes there to enhance the detection of devices. I can't really easily show that. Okay, 2020.13, we'll skip over the X schedule changes and we'll jump to the xLights changes. Let's throw a few more models in here, just because I want to have lots of models because we're going to need that. And let's add a window frame in like that. Looks good. Okay, the next one relates to the visualizer. So if we bring the visualizer up with all our models here, if you press the key, in this case I've pressed a W, it scrolled down to the model that starts with W. If I hit S, it goes to the first star. If I was down here and I press C, it would scroll to the custom. So yeah, just quick ways to quickly navigate up and down this list when you're trying to find a model that you want to drag and drop across. I have also got this hide models assigned to other controllers. In order to demonstrate that, I really need to add another controller here. Let's make it a Falcon controller. F16V3, no expansion boards. let's do the same. Oh, the FPP file, that's fine. So if I go into here, and I don't know, if I go and add all of these stars across, you'll notice I can only see a handful of models here. That's because I didn't make this auto layout and auto size. When you do that, you can see all the models here. So we've moved a bunch of these stars on to this prop. Let's just keep going. Let's put them all on. Okay, last of them. Okay, so all our stars are over on this particular controller. Now let's go to our other controller and bring up visualize. If I say hide models assigned to other controllers, it will remove all of those models from the list so that I don't have to search through them all. Now you can still unhide them if you want to suddenly reassign a model onto this controller. But once you've started to correctly assign all your models to your controller, you probably don't want to see the ones that you've assigned to other controllers when you're trying to populate this particular one. So yeah, a lot easier if you do that. Layered arches. So for a long time, we've had the ability to drop an arch model down and say that we wanted to have 3 arches, and it would put them together in a line like this. There's now this layered arches checkbox, and if you check that, it creates a layered arch, but you now have to say the layered arch sizes. So here it's defaulted, although I've said layered arches, it's created 1 arch of 50. But what I can do is I can set that to, I don't know, 90, and I can say, well, it's actually 30, 30, 30, much like you would with a layered star, and it's now created 3 arches inside one another. And the way in which it's wired, of course, depends upon your starting location. But effectively what it's going to do, this is the green square. And if you look at the node layout for this, it's going to start on the inside one here, go across, but then it's going to come to the second one and come back, and then finally to the outside and go back across again. And so you need to think about that from a node wiring perspective. There is no wiring layout at the moment that allows you to start on the outside. You start on the inside and work your way out. The layers, of course, don't need to be the same size. I can make that 50 and I can make that 10. Actually, I probably wanted to do it the other way around. It's inside to outside, so 10 on the inside and 50 on the outside, and it will automatically distribute them all around on your layered arch. So that's layered arches for you. The next one is sparkles. We've had sparkles for a long time. Let's go and throw our color wash down. Let's get some green and some blue maybe going on here. Of course, it would help if a track for young players, you drag something like this all the way over here and it's beyond the end of the sequence, and so it doesn't seem to do anything useful, so we need to bring it back into the sequence. We've got a transition. We clearly don't want a transition, and so now it's just a color wash. Now, we've always had sparkles, and so you could come here and you can turn this up and set the number of sparkles that you want to have, but you now also have the ability to control the color of the sparkles. So let's say we want our magenta sparkles. Your sparkles here are now a magenta color rather than a white color. And of course, you can layer them and have multicolored sparkles, so it gives you a lot greater control over your colors. Effect suspend and effect suppress. So this is I made a video, oh God, at least a year ago, I guess, which talked about how do you freeze an effect. What happens if I had a morph here and I wanted to freeze it halfway through and just hold it? Well, you can now do that. So if I wanted to freeze this after, I don't know, 10 frames, I can now set this to 10. And what will happen is the effect will run for the first 10 frames. 10 frames, this is a 20 frames a second sequence. So half a second in, it will basically freeze the effect and it will just hold that particular state through to the end of the effect. So now if you want to freeze an effect, it's actually really, really trivial to do. The other thing that you can do, and don't forget, if you're going to undo this, you want to make it a nice big number. You can also suppress an effect until a frame. And so what that does is interesting as well, because what it actually does is it actually suppresses the effect. The effect doesn't do anything for the first 20 frames or the first second. So the best way to show that is let's throw a butterfly underneath this effect. Now, this is a morph effect. So you would think that the morph effect would immediately start to draw over it. But if you watch it carefully when it starts, the morph effect actually starts halfway up. And the reason is that's where it got to after a second. So this effect has effectively it runs for 20 frames without outputting any data at all, and then at the 20th frame it outputs as if it had been running for 20 frames already. So if you've got an effect, and I look, a classic example of this might be liquid, and there's two ways to do this. There's already a way to do this with liquid, but let's imagine that I was going to put barriers around all of this thing and fill it up. But I don't want it to actually start empty. Well, one of the things I could do here is I could set this to 20 frames, and you can see that it actually it pre-fills so that it's almost all full before the effect even starts, but it does start black for a period of time, and then it draws. So yes. Suppress stops the effect rendering until you've reached that frame. Freeze effect at frame gets to a certain point in the rendering and then just stops and holds that particular effect for a period of time. Model group center. So this had a few defects along the way, but when you create a model group, we added the ability for you to control the center of the model group. So let's create a group, an unimaginative name. And what it's done here is it's now drawing a cross where the center of the group is. And if you watch that cross carefully, and I grab this this star here, so the center was down here, and I've moved that star up to there, and I go back to that group, you can see that the center has now moved up because that star's moved. All right. But the other thing that you can do with this is if you are going to play with this X center offset and Y center offset, you can now see these things have an effect as you change things. So if I set that to, I don't know, 500, okay, that's close to where I might want it to be. I might want that to be 460 maybe, if I want to center it on this star here. And then my Y center, oops. Oh, so that was interesting. Okay, I'm not sure what I did then. I might have hit the delete key accidentally. So here, if I set this to minus, I don't know, let's set it to minus 150. See if that ends up in the right place. Not quite. Minus 250. It's getting closer. Minus 350, yeah, much closer. So you can see how I can now play with this a little and set the center and see what the effect is of my adjustments is on setting the center. So a lot easier to play with the centers of your model groups. And now if I go and sequence this, this particular group, and this was demonstrated in a prior video, that star is now considered the center of the group, even though the real center of the group is off to the left. And if I drop something like a pinwheel down on the group and make it thick, you can see that that star is the center of the group, even though it clearly isn't the real center of the group, but we've managed to adjust it. And so the pinwheel now rotates around it. I expect most of the sequence sellers will start to set the centers of their groups, because it will make it so much easier when they drop effects that have a center. If you then go and set your centers of your groups, and then when you import the sequences from them, they'll map much more cleanly and easily to your displays and save you a bunch of time. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, the next one I can't really show, but when you do a discover, actually I can show it. When you do a discover and it reaches out to your network and finds all of your controllers and populates the list here, Dan has changed the way the FPP stuff comes in. The Colt one? Yeah, okay, the Colt one's the one that demonstrates it. Okay, so what he's done is he's defaulted it to auto layout models and auto size and auto upload, etc. Right, which he feels are much better defaults. And generally speaking, I agree with him, they're better defaults for those boards. So when you do a discovery, it comes in more optimally pre-configured. If you like. We also updated the Zoom room link. The Zoom room password has come and gone, and I think it's still gone. But the Zoom room link was updated with the password, and if the password ever comes back and they keep it the same, then hopefully the link will continue to work. Open pixel control support. So for those who are where open pixel control is not very commonly used. There are a couple of niche controllers out there that do use it, but open pixel control is now one of the protocols here that you can support if your controller happens to support it. It'll be here and you can select it. Key binding editing. Okay, so we've had key bindings forever. People have, sometimes gone in and played with the key binding file, but it's always been a bit of a scary proposition to go and edit, because it's an XML file, and most users are not particularly comfortable with playing with XML files. But there's now a key bindings editor here in the files menu, and so what it does is it shows you your key bindings and shows you what each one of them is. It also will, I think it's over here, it will explain to you exactly what that does. So what's an effects toggle? Well, an effects toggle toggles the display of the effect dropper panel, and so forth. So here are all the things, and you can come over here and assign it to a key and put additional alt modifiers, etc. It'll also show if there are any conflicting keys. So here we do have a couple of conflicts where these two things are defined as the same thing. So clearly only one of them is going to work, and so you may want to change it. You can also see some of your effect shortcuts that you might have put in place. So yeah, you can edit these, etc. And when you close it and you close xLights, it will save an updated key binding file. So you no longer need to go and edit your XML file. Okay, moving on. This one's a very minor one, but now when you drag, and it's a little bit hard to see, I think, in this video, but when you drag a model, the location of the particular corner that you're dragging appears down here in this status bar, and depending on which corner you grab depends on which one displays down there. So if you're trying to line two models up, now the only thing I will say is it's not perfectly accurate. It's the position of the handle, not necessarily the edgemost pixel. But if you're trying to line two things up at the opposite end of the screens and you want to get pretty close, that will definitely get you pretty close. But you may still need to do some more manual alignment or something if you need to. And the final one is support for saving. We're 2020.16. So the final one here was, again, it was FPP Connect related. And with FPP, you're obviously able to set passwords And now when you do set passwords in FPP Connect, you're able to save those and it will remember which password. So even if you have a different password, I'm not sure exactly where that is on here, to be honest. It used to be when you did the upload, it used to prompt you for the passwords. It's possible it still does. I don't really want to push anything up to these, and I don't have passwords set on them. All right, the next one's kind of cool. It's been on our to-do list for a while. We've always had the ability up here to scrub audio. So if this was an audio file, if you held down the control key and dragged left to right, it would actually play the audio as you dragged. And so it sounds very choppy and everything because it obviously is fast or slow depending on how quickly you're dragged and how much you're zoomed in. But it was kind of useful, particularly if you're doing lyrics and the like. Now what happens though is if you are in the middle of an effect here, he says, is that right? Maybe I do have to have audio. That's actually possible. I do need to have, in fact, I think that's what it is. I need to have audio. So let me quickly create a sequence with audio. So it's always been possible for you to come up here and scrub the audio, and you won't be able to hear this because I don't think I've shared my audio, but as I drag this backwards and forwards, the audio plays according to where I am, and when I'm very zoomed out, it's very choppy and hard to tell. But when you're zoomed in, and it'll play a little bit more. If you can move your mouse at roughly the time or the speed that the song would play, it would actually play quite normally. But of course, in practice, you tend to be scrubbing faster or slower. But with this enhancement, if I come over here and start scrubbing where there is an effect is, it now shows the effect where I am scrubbing. And so the effect can go backwards and forwards. Let's drop a morph down. Okay, so here's our morph. There's our morph go forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards, etc. So you can see exactly what's happening at a particular frame. Now, of course, you can be much more zoomed in than that. And so you can quickly flick backwards and forwards between a frame and do frame level sequencing. Whereas in the past, you always were kind of watching it at regular playback speed. You can now, using the scrubbing, basically watch your sequence frame by frame. And I will look at whether I can add it to animations. Okay, so there's been a change to the picture effect. When you drag your picture effect down, if there's something wrong with the file or something, such as the file name's invalid, or the file's missing, it will now display in red, much like the video effect and the shader effect does. At the moment, it doesn't quite do it when it's blank, which actually I think that's a bug. I'll fix that. But yeah, so you can see, hopefully that'll make your picture effects, which haven't imported correctly, a little bit more obvious. The next one is a layout thing. Obviously, when you build something out of pixels, let's imagine pixel strip, you've all got these little WS2811 chips, and you've got a red, a green, a blue, a red, a green, and blue all the way down, and you control the colors. There's actually no reason why you have to attach a red, a green, and a blue to the 2811 chip. You could just attach 3 reds or 3 greens or 3 blues and provide a LED by LED control, but still single color strip. And in fact, these do exist. And what we've done is we've added those as a new string type, which is this node single color. So you choose node single color, you choose a color, and this will actually, so this is a 50 node star. And so you will find that this will use 50 channels. Yep, 2011 through to 2060. And that's because each of those 50 nodes is a single channel controlling a single common color, in this case, red. And so for those that might acquire such strips and want to control them, that's now possible. You may have already noticed it because I've been up here a few times. I have reorganized the tools menu into something that I hope is a little bit more logical. at the top, test is still there. We then have, check sequence, and all the various packages and downloads and the like are up there. All of the things which are around delivery of the sequence, whether it's the batch render, the FPP connect, the bulk controller upload, or the HingSpix export, they're all in that section. Our two exports of models and effects are here. Then we have those kind of debuggy type things, viewing the logs, packaging the logs, and purging the various caches. And then you've got the true utilities, the 2D path and the custom models and the lyric data generator, and so forth, all down here. And finally, you have xSchedule. So hopefully that's a little bit more logical. The old one had kind of grown up over time and was a little bit random. So I'm hoping that will be a little bit easier for people to get to understand. Okay, the next one relates to some 3D stuff in the layout, and it relates to some of these DMX moving heads. Effectively, it's just a couple of additional properties here to give you control over these things. So we've always had this beam length control where you can control how far out the beam goes, but we've now also added the ability to control how wide the beam is. So I can have a very narrow beam or a very wide, well, like 300, a very wide beam, etc. And that also works with the 3D DMX models as well. This one here, right, again, I can make this, the units here are a little bit different, but yeah, I can make that beam a lot wider as well. We've done a similar thing, which came a little bit later with things like the area flood. So the area flood is now a 3D. Well, it was always 3D, but it was kind of funky. It kind of anchored itself on the z=0 axis. Now it doesn't. But here you do have control over the beam display length, so you can make the beam go out more. Obviously, if you want to change the size of the beam, you do that like you have always done by playing with the actual model size and so forth. You'll notice that as you resize it, the beam length also changes, and that's because this beam display length is actually a multiple of the dimensions of the model. So you'll need to play with both to get it exactly right. And we've also done the same thing with the floodlight. The floodlight previously did not display in 3D at all. It was just a flat colored circle, but now it displays as basically a cone. And again, you can control the size by sizing the model, and you can also change the beam display length here in a similar way, where you can drive it out like so. So yeah, for those people that are using floodlights and 3D and they want to more accurately show where the light reaches, etc., that's an option. The next one we'll go back to 2D for. What I want to do is I want to throw down. Let's throw down a couple of moving heads here. And let's go into this first model here and go down to our node names. And I don't know. Let's just give them silly names. Fred, Mary, and Joe. Okay, let's put those into a group. I need to just add a group. And I want to add, what's this one called? DMX moving head 2 and 3 to it. So go back up to here, DMX. Oh, so 2's already there, so we'll add that one in, and we'll add that one in, and we'll reorder them. So actually, no, I was wrong. I don't want number 1. I do want it in that previous order. So it's really important the model that's first in the group is all. So I do want 2 because 2 is, I'll put that one in as well, but 2 is the top one here, and that's the one we put the names on. So we want to have that first because that's going to be important in terms of how this behaves. Just double check. Yep, that's the right one. Okay, so now if we go and sequence this, and you can sequence DMX models in a group. It's a relatively recent capability, but typically what you would do is you drop the DMX effect here and you would come up to render style and you'd say per model default. And you'll see that it has actually read those node names from the first model in the group. And so that way you know that you're modifying which channel you're modifying. Now, typically when you create a group like this, all of those DMX models would be the same identical prop, i.e. exactly the same number of channels, exactly the same channel order, etc. Creating groups of DMX models, which are all very different, is going to generate very, very strange behaviors, and I would not recommend it. But yeah, if you've got a collection of all the same type of model, you can name the channels on one of them or all of them. It doesn't really matter. And then when you sequence on the group level now, you can see these names. Now, it's always been true that if you dropped the DMX effect onto that moving head, that those channels would show up. And of course, if you drop it onto one that doesn't have names, of course, it just comes up with channel 1, 2, and 3. So it always worked on a single model. It's just that now it works on a group. All right, and that brings us to 18. A couple of changes here. This one I think is kind of important. Let's imagine that this FPP 2.x was running an LED panel. And so, yeah, I had it on DDP and I don't know, I had maybe several tens of thousands of channels. And when I'm sequencing in xLights, I kind of want to be able to drive my panel. So I want to be able to output to lights. And so setting this up as DDP makes a lot of sense. However, when I finally get around to running my show, and whether I'm running it out of xSchedule or whether I'm running it out of FPP, and I configure my FPP master or xSchedule starts to play, I don't want it to be sending all that DDP data to that Pi, because I'm going to want to run that Pi in remote mode and read the data out of a local FSCQ file. And so that's always been possible, but you had to do funky things, like you had to remember to come into here and inactivate that output so that when you started it up in xSchedule didn't start sending out the data, or when you uploaded it using FPP Connect to FPP, you had to remember to go into FPP and deactivate the DDP so your master wasn't sending all of this DDP data to your controller. So the change we've made is we've added a new status up here. The active used to be a checkbox. It was either active or it was inactive. But now there's actually a third state, and the third state is xLights only. And when something is in xLights only state, that means that when you're running it in xLights here and you turn on output to lights, it's going to send DDP data to that particular FPP instance. However, if I'm running this same sequence on xSchedule, this output is going to be deactivated and it will send out no data at all. And if I upload this configuration to FPP, this DDP output will be present in the list of outputs, but the enabled checkbox will not be checked, which means, again, the FPP master will not be sending all of that data out to the controller, flooding the network with lots and lots of traffic. The next one, okay, so the next one, there's a couple of these, I think. So there's some changes that Scott's made around the HinksPix export. So up here in the HinksPix export, he's added master remote support, which I believe is this stuff up here. Now, I don't have HinksPix controllers, so it obviously doesn't go and find them, and so I'm not really able to demonstrate this. It would probably be a better idea for Scott to make a video and explain some of the Hinkspick stuff, because yeah, it's one of the controllers that I just don't have access to. Okay, so Priam D, a developer that's been chipping in with a couple of sort of minor tweaks and optimizations, has done a bit of work in 2020.18 around the custom model, particularly tackling very large custom models and some of the inefficiencies in the way we were loading them. And so he's rewritten some of that stuff, which he tells me, based on the data that he's produced, has made a really significant difference to those people that have got large numbers of custom models or large custom models. The next one is around reporting face images. I'm not really going to show this because it's kind of trivial, but if you've got faces in here, and I don't, but I could add one in, and the faces have been deleted. These are matrix faces where you're using images and the image files have been deleted. When you run check sequence, it would tell you that the image wasn't there and that it was broken, but it never really actually told you exactly which face that image was associated with, which is not such a big deal most of the time because it's pretty obvious. But we were debugging some people's displays where they had a lot of these errors and the names were not closely related. So now it tells us what the name of the face is that the image file is associated with that's missing. It just makes it a lot quicker to clean things up. All right, so the final one relates to spanning models. So let's go and build another tree. And let's just leave it as 16 strings here of 50 and imagine that we're going to use 16 ports. And let's go and let's make this, let's make this a Falcon. I just like working with Falcons. They're fonder. I know them a lot better. All right, and let's go into the visualizer. Let's take that off and let's go down to our tree that we just added. Okay, so there's our tree with 16 strings here, and we'll drag and drop it on. And as you'd expect, it uses up 16 ports on the controller, which is all well and good. Now, obviously people have been using smart remotes for things like this. And so if you come here and you put a tree onto a smart remote, well, it puts every string onto port, in this case, port A, or sorry, smart remote A. And so effectively this is going to use up 4 smart remotes, all coming from the controller. So you're going to have to run 4 Cat5 cables from an expansion port or something. I mean, I've said this is an F16, but let's imagine it's an F48. And I'm going to have to run those 4 cables out so I can connect all of these to the A. But a more logical way to build this would be to have this tree run, the first 4 strings run off smart remote A on ports 1 to 4, and then the next 4 strings off smart remote B also on ports 1 to 4, and then the next 4 run off smart remote C on ports 1 to 4, and then I'm still going to have to run to ports 5 to 8 for the last string because it's 16 strings, and so now I only have to run 2 Ethernet cables back to my main board. That's never been possible to configure through here, and never been possible, therefore, to easily upload to the controller. But now it is. We've added these 2 additional smart remote modes here. So the ABC one here with all in capitals is basically saying spread the model across smart remotes connected to the same ports. And so when I set it to ABC, you can see string 1 is on port 1A, string 2 is on port 2A, string 3 is on port 3A, and 4 is on 4A, and then 5 is back on 1B. And so you can now just daisy chain these smart remotes inside your box with a single cable, or in this case 2 cables, because we do end up using smart remote A on ports 5 through 8, back to your main controller, which it's true. It's a much more logical way to configure this if you're going with a model where you run fairly short strands of pixels on your tree rather than doing lots of zigzagging and power injection, etc. You can also say that I want to start this on just B and C. So if you're using a smart remote A for a bunch of other stuff, but you just want to run this on B and C, you can do that as well. Although in this case, of course, it's had to go another smart remote out. The other thing is you don't have to start it on port 1. If you want to start it on port 2, that's okay. But notice that it goes 1, 2, 3 on ports 2, 3, and 4, but then it does jump back to port 1 for the next string, right? So it's only stopped using Smart Remote 1A because you told it to use A, B, and C. So that's how it works. So yeah, I think that solves yet another gap in our ability to easily drag and drop, configure, and upload to controllers. Always interested in understanding situations that people might face where they are struggling to find good ways to do this configuration. And there was a video I made a little while ago where I talked about the return of shadow models and how shadow models provide another way in which you can solve some of your upload and configuration woes by creating models that are specifically designed to help configure your controllers and continue to step away from all of that manual configuring that people were otherwise doing. And that's the xLights changes. Let's move to xSchedule. All right, here it is. Okay, there's not a hell of a lot going on here. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Some of this stuff's going to be a little bit hard to show, and so I will talk a lot about some things rather than actually show them, but I will show some things. The first one relates to SMPTE linear timecode. So linear timecode is most commonly used in theatrical or typically big productions where they want to coordinate a whole bunch of different devices, be they lasers or fireworks or another lighting rig, maybe a rig that's more optimized towards controlling DMX moving spots and everything. And you want to integrate in xLights as well. It's now possible to have xLights act as an SMTP remote. This effectively listens to your line in on your audio and basically listens to the linear timecode, which is coded in as an audio stream, and then synchronizes the display. And like all of the other time codes, you create a playlist. The playlist is then the linear timecode then basically maps to the offset within that playlist. So yeah, that's kind of how the linear timecode stuff works. There are some options here. You will want to choose things like the frame rate, and you'll also need to choose potentially an input audio device to tell it what you want it to listen to, particularly if you've got multiple audio devices and you need to know which one the linear timecode is coming in on, so it knows what to listen to. Make xSchedule. So next one's another option. So there's a couple of changes that were made very late in the season last year around having xSchedule basically influence particularly Windows. This is not really implemented on OS X. We don't get a lot of very specific OS X development on xSchedule. But I tend to find when I'm running my show is, I want xSchedule to run with high priority. I want xSchedule, in my case, I want the screen to stay on. I like being able to just glance at my computer and see that, the status of my controllers, etc. But there were other users who were very frustrated that the screen stayed on and the screen wouldn't turn off. They're obviously happy that the computer stays on, but they want the screen to actually turn off so that it's not sitting there glowing in the corner using power, etc. So you now have the option to control whether the computer screen stays on or not. Now this is only true. Well, the high priority where X schedule runs at a high priority, that's only true while the show's actually playing. When the show's not playing, it will still run at normal priority with everything else on your computer, but it jumps up in priority when the show starts to try and make sure that everything is getting output correctly at the right times. So yeah, that's an option now rather than forced. Okay, the next one is a couple of options or a couple of changes. So if I go in here and add an advanced playlist, and I'm going to add the file option. So the file option here is a playlist item that you can add, which basically writes content out to a file when that particular step runs. The most common use case I've seen it in the past is if you've got a vast FM transmitter with RDS, and you want to read the RDS strings, the VAST program likes to read that data out of a file. And so you would use this file item to basically write the name of the song that's playing into the file, which then your VAST transmitter would pick up. But it would basically overwrite the file each time it did so. The change here is that there's now this append box. And so what that allows you to do is actually create something like a log. So you can set up this step here. You can have this run everything in this step in every step. So every song that plays, this step will always run. You can come up here and I call this log.text. And here it gives you a whole bunch of things here. And so you can say the step name, for instance, is typically the name of the song that's currently playing. So if you want to have a log file which contains per line the name of /n, we'll just put a carriage return in. You want to put the name of the song that plays every time it plays. So maybe you've got some mechanism that controls which song plays. Maybe the users are voting or something, and you want to keep a log of what actually played. You can now do that here. You can also put a timestamp at the front here. So if you want to know when it played as well. And maybe you want to make it a comma separated file, so you can throw a comma in there, and then you can load that up into Excel or something later and work out how popular songs were, etc. So, and that's just by clicking the append button down here, and this now becomes a log of what happened during my show. So yeah, that's the first one. The other thing you'll notice here is we always displayed how long a step was. This step here, because it just writes to a file, basically runs in a single frame, but it now also tells you the offset within the sequence as well. So if I was to go and add an FSCQ in here, which means I need to go and find one. So I'm just going to go and do something that I really shouldn't do, but I'm just going to go and grab an FSCQ file here. You can see that it tells me here that this one's going to run. That's actually incorrect because this is an every step, so it's actually not going to. It's going to run at the same time as these things. But yeah, conceptually, this is after one frame, so it starts a little bit later. And if I go back and add another FSCQ in here, I'll add a bunch of FSCQs in here. You can just see the time offset from the beginning of the sequence that each particular sequence is going to start. And the same is true here. You can now see the offset within the sequence. And when I talked about the linear time codes here, the linear time codes will always work on the first playlist in this list, and it will basically orientate according to this timestamp here. The next one is another playlist item. So we have another one here called color organ. This is really early days. Let's add a step, so we'll just move it down. I plan to work a little bit more on this, but what this theory allows you to do is you would typically potentially add 3 or 4 of these. And you might actually put this up in your every step, so it always runs with every sequence. And what it effectively allows you to do is you can set a start note and an end note, which allows you to set the frequency. So if I want to say middle C, which happens to be the 60 code, if I want to set the pixels that start at start channel 1 for the first 100 pixels, let's imagine that's, I don't know, a mini tree or something, and I want to have that fade over, I don't know, a second, so that would be 20 frames, and I can set a threshold. And what that will do is this will listen to the audio that is playing in your sequence, and when, or it might be a microphone. Actually, no, I think this is actually driven off your audio in your sequence. And so if you had just an audio track, for instance, it will trigger off the volume of the audio. So when there is a middle C note found and it hits a threshold of at least 80, this is going to flash those 100 pixels white and then fade to black over a second. And you can change the color, of course, etc. And so you can set up several of these and they will all basically just automatically react to the music. So if you're just playing a bunch of audio and you don't even know what song's going to play, but you just want it to, the lights to flash and look somewhat related to the music, it's a color organ. I think I've got some work to do to possibly round it out, but yeah, it's not too bad. The next one's really important. Well, I definitely think it's really important. I use video in my display. Just basically a virtual Santa in the window. And xSchedule's always done video. The challenge with xSchedule's video is it does all the work itself and it's not entirely optimized. And our attempts to try and make video to work with the hardware decoder has been patchy at best. I've never been entirely happy with it, particularly on Windows. And so one of the things I've done now is I've added in this use media player option here. Now you can see you lose some options. You can no longer cache the video and you don't have control over fade in and fade out. But what it uses is it uses your operating system's inbuilt media player to play the video file. And generally speaking, that's going to offer a slightly smoother experience with a slight degrading in functionality, as you see. So for instance, your window, when you position your window, which is here off the screen, you might find that it doesn't scale exactly the way you'd like it to scale because the inbuilt video player leaves black bars or whatever. So it's not necessarily going to be perfect in all situations, but it should perform better generally. So if you found that video has lagged or that the video potentially caused occasional issues with the rest of your show, you may want to try switching to using the media player. And it really is as simple as just checking the checkbox. Everything else will work exactly the same. So yeah. Okay, a couple of other changes. Virtual matrices. So when you add a virtual matrix, you're always able to rotate the virtual matrix, but you can now flip them. This is kind of important, particularly if you want to visualize in a virtual matrix, something like a P10 panel, etc. It would always visualize upside down. And so now if you want to, you can come in here and say, I want to flip it vertical. And it means that your visualization of your P10 panel or whatever will actually look correct. So yeah, just a slight change there. The other one that's changed here is if you use the all set, which it basically allows you to set a channel or a set of channels. I can set channels 1 through 100, for instance. I can set them to, I don't know, 255. What you can now do is you can say, I want it to fade it to 0. And the duration up here, so if I set that to 10 seconds, what this will do is it will set all of these channels to 100 at the beginning, and then after 10 seconds or over a duration of 10 seconds, it will steadily fade this 255 down to 0. So it's like a flash and fade rather than just holding it 255. And if you don't do fade to 0, obviously it sets it to 255 and holds it at 255, which is what it's always done. And there's a similar one here in set color, except obviously here you're setting a color, but then you have the option to fade to black. So it will turn on, it will start orange, and then over the duration of the effect, it will fade down to black again. So you get a flash of color and a fade away. And the final change, the very, very last change, is in the schedule. You've always been able to put something like sunset in here or sunrise in here. But now, as you can see, when you enter sunset or sunrise, it now gives you the ability to offset. So, the sun here typically goes down, and I imagine, I guess it would vary by latitude. But, from the time that the sun goes down to the time that it actually gets dark, it's, anything up to half an hour to 45 minutes. And so if you want to have the lights turn on at sunset, but you really know that it's actually not going to be dark until 45 minutes after sunset, you can have your on time now set to be 45 minutes after sunset. And that will obviously vary by day. So if you're running your show over a long period of time and you want it to just adapt to the seasons, you'll want to set that. You can also use negative numbers here. So if I want to start at 45 minutes before sunset, I can also do that as well. Now remember, sunset and sunrise are highly affected by geography. And so don't forget to go into your options. Sorry, it just, that schedule started playing. So let's go into options. Don't forget to set your city here. There's a whole bunch of them. You just need to choose one that is roughly close to where you are. If you are in a location and there is no city here that's even remotely close, in particularly longitude, but latitude also makes a difference, let me know and I'm happy to add more. It's the list that I built this off was a very, very long list, and I kind of had to decide how many I really wanted to put in place. So I generally try to, well, for most countries, choose the big cities or a few big cities in various locations. But yeah, with the ability to do the adjustment now, it probably doesn't matter so much as long as you can set the appropriate adjustment on sunrise and sunset. And that's the changes running from 2020.11 to 2020.18. By now, everyone knows that, not only did Transworld get cancelled for this year, but Christmas Expo has also been cancelled for this year, which is unfortunate. I know here in Australia, we ran our mini over the Easter weekend because everyone was stuck at home. And those presentations I know will start to appear on one of the ACL video sites. In fact, some of them are already out. I'd encourage you to head over there and watch some of those videos. I think there were some really good presentations delivered by a real variety of people, some people that you may not have heard present and may have a different perspective on things. And obviously, the Existential series continues on the main channel, and we again encourage you to check those series out as well. Thanks, guys.